Welcome back inside my wardrobe. This video took a lot longer than I expected, partly due to some major complications that I stepped into at my own request. But for now, let's just start by priming the model. After that, I began to create the undercoat with metal texture. First, I coated all areas with grey color, and then I diluted heavily the black paint to a glaze-like consistency and randomly painted small areas. Next, I covered it with worn effects from AK, followed by a dark rust color concentrating it in the middle of painted section. But when I tried to activate worn effects, it didn't work as intended. I had put a lot of water on it and kept scraping with a paintbrush, but the paint wouldn't move much. Maybe I didn't use enough chipping liquid, or perhaps I didn't work quickly enough and missed the activation time frame. But at that point I didn't mind. It still served as great undercoat for the base color, and it looked so good that part of me wanted to leave it as it was. Yet I sprayed another layer of worn effects and added a yellow base color. It turned green over the dark background, but I wanted to achieve a mossy look, so it was intended. What I didn't intend was to mess up the paint job due to my inexperience with chipping liquids. It was not supposed to look like this. The paint started to float on the surface in large pieces, tearing in an uncontrolled manner. I didn't know what had gone wrong or what I should do next. After a short break to gather my thoughts, I dunked it in the water, hoping to activate the chipping fluid enough to remove the yellow paint. But it was too late. This situation held me back for a few days. I had to decide between stripping the paint and starting over, or painting it black, but let's leave making two bad decisions in one video for the future. Learning from my mistakes, I tested the stripping fluid to see if it will dissolve the cast metal textures and bullet holes that I created with Tamiya putty in the previous video, and sure enough it will. Okay, so it's priming time again. It didn't look that bad after all, and by accident I may even have discovered a cool technique to add textures. I changed the painting sheen to a blue color. The yellow paint I had was either from Vallejo Air or Games Workshop layer. I suspect that the problem with chipping partly occurred due to the poor coverage of these paints, or the latex properties of Vallejo. As a matter of fact, after I figured out how to work better with chipping medium, I managed to get it right even with those paints. The trick is to obtain as much coverage as possible with a very thin layer. After painting and chipping white stripes, it was time for decals. Some of you may be familiar with microsol and microset decal solutions. However, you may not know that you can use microsol's melting properties to distress and tear decals. The best effect is achieved when you allow the decal to adhere first and set, and after that you can melt it again to create scratches. Unfortunately, I was rushing too much, so I had to cover excessive distress with black paint. I painted the remaining base colors and then applied another layer of worn effects. I may have used more chipping fluid on this model than paint itself. Then I ran a rust color along the edges. I consider this a reverse rust chipping technique, because normally you chip the base color. After chipping, I decided I wanted to add even more damage on the cast metal parts. They weren't made in the Sacred Fortress of Mars, but were rather rough replacements made during battle. I prepared a template from hard paper. After positioning it on the model, I sprayed white paint, hoping to achieve some overspray for a more imperfect result. You can do this by lifting the template slightly higher above the surface. However, the gaps were too small to allow the paint to spray underneath, so I added overspray manually. I painted the shoulder blades white, but I didn't like how it looked, so I stripped the whole white layer with water and instead went with just a red stripe in the middle, along with distressed decals over it. Then it was time for oil and wax. With black oil paint, I did a pin wash. After that, I covered the mechanical parts with a heavy black oil wash to prepare them for wax-based metallizers. They work similar to oil paints, the difference is that you can polish them for more shiny look. I primed and painted the Dead Space Marine pilot and glued him into position with CA glue. Then I closed the top cover and painted cables attached to his corpse. With white Abteilung 502 oil paint, I began one of the coolest part of the whole paint job: environmental effects, most commonly known as weathering. #bird poop. But honestly, I didn't have anything specific in mind. I just happened to have only a few oil paints and enamels, and white being the best choice. It shows how the model was standing in that spot for a long time, allowing the rain to wash down all dust and dirt accumulated on the surface. We also need to take care of the diorama, but last thing to do with the Dreadnought is to give his shapes more definition, and I was doing that with just a regular pencil. But the effect is quite impressive. The lines are straight, tight and shiny, far better than I could achieve with a brush in the time I invested in this technique. Of course, the pencil is going to be wiped out by any finger touch, but it is a display model, so it is not something I'm worried about. It is worth testing if you could keep the shine under the varnish, or maybe look out for AK metallic markers, because I suspect they can work in similar precision and it's a paint inside. Now, for the diorama, I primed it black and base coated all parts, including grass. Then I used a lot of Nuln oil to wash the earth and wood. I used wet blending to paint the stones and sprayed more Nuln oil onto the lake bed to make it look darker than the rest of the ground, giving it a wet-soaked appearance. Also because there will be a model casting a shadow, and because I want the water to have bright rusty color, and dark background will make it pop even more. I also highlighted the wood and big stone a little more, and drowned everything with Nuln oil again. So the whole project is made mostly out of worn effects and Nuln oil. With a syringe filled with slightly diluted PVA, I applied glue over the roots, trunk and the fallen part of the tree so I can add moss. The product I'm using here is a grinded sponge, and I have no idea about the manufacturer since I found it already in my stash hiding for 15 years or so when I stepped into the hobby. After a short while, it was clear that the best way to apply is to crush a pinch between your fingers and push that little ball in a glue blob. But I figured it out after a huge mess I have with particles all over the diorama. They were loose, so I got rid of them after the glue dried out. I soaked more diluted PVA into the bigger moss deposits to be sure that they are not moving anywhere. Then I painted the moss with watered down mixture of yellow, green and red in different ratios to achieve more dimensional color variations. The last part of diorama was to add paper plants. They are called paper but have more of a plastic feel to them while handling. I just found out that the original printed color didn't fit my needs, so I coated them in similar mix as the moss. And after attaching the Dreadnought in place, blending his feet with the ground a little, it was time for the cherry on the top. The cherry being epoxy water resin, the top being the diorama. And while I'll mix the resin in suggested ratios, I just wanted to ask you to help me gain the blessing of YouTube machine spirits by liking this video. It will help me a lot. Thank you. I applied a little of paint inside to add some hue. I poured a little of it on the diorama. Then with a brush I coated all details meant to be under the water. I did it to be sure there will be no air bubbles trapped inside, and waiting to go up when I turn my head the other way. After I was sure that I have the bottom ready, and with help of my daughter, we poured the rest of the resin.
I będziemy właśnie nalewać do pierwszej kaczki. Ostatni płyn.
The next day I covered the lake with water gel. Pushed it a little with air from my airbrush for some more realistic movement. And finally, I could take the paint tape off.